All right, well, Judge Reynolds, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're glad we finally got you on. I always like to ask when candidates run for an office, when that decision was made in their mind and why they decided to choose that particular office. So with you running for Secretary of State, what ultimately kind of tipped the scales for you to say, I really want to run for this?
Well, to answer your first question, when did I decide? About a year ago. And once I decided, I did it. Why? What tipped the scales? Everything that's going on now. I took an oath to the Constitution, as you know, former judge and civil rights lawyer. And I took an oath to the Constitution long before I became a candidate. And watching what I thought was an attack on our democracy is really what led me to say, I'm running for Georgia Secretary of State. This is that moment. You know, Coretta Scott King said that in every generation, you have to fight for democracy. And I just felt when I looked back over my life and my career and everything that I'd done, I needed to be a part of standing up to what I feel is unfair to so many Georgians.
Yeah, and I want to talk about your background because I think for a lot of people, they consider the Secretary of State race, obviously it's an important role in government, but maybe to be a more down ballot race. So they may not be always looking into these candidates. And I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your background as a judge, as an attorney, as someone who has worked in the White House before.
Absolutely. I have an extensive background. I've always run on saying I'm the most qualified person you could ever want. I was the governor's lawyer for Roy Barnes, the last Democratic governor. And in being that, I was over the executive office for the lawyer for the governor, so I have state government experience. I served as a state court judge in Fulton County for nearly a decade. Impeccable record doing that. Then I went on to get an earned PhD and a criminologist where I taught at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies, social justice, all of that. Then I worked for the Biden-Harris administration over the Civil Rights Division for the United States Department of Agriculture, where I was the EEO officer for over 117,000 employees. And then I did some television. I owned my own syndicated talk show. Others may not understand what it means to own a syndicated talk show, but that's a business. And I have business background. So I'm a former CEO. But even before that, with Roy Barnes, I almost forgot, I was the executive counsel and chief of staff to Lieutenant Governor Pierre Howard and chief of staff for the Senate. So I have legislative experience, state executive experience, running a federal agency, and a member of the judiciary. And also I'm a pastor. And I have a degree in theology. Yeah. So I have two PhDs and a Juris Doctor, my undergraduate degree. So I'm highly educated and highly experienced and really ready for this job.
Yeah, you mentioned Roy Barnes. He was the last Democrat to hold the governor's mansion. It's been a long time, essentially 3 decades since a Democrat has held the Secretary of State's position in Georgia. And so do you think about the significance of your run potentially being the first Democrat in many, many years, many, many decades to hold this important office now that it, I think you're right, holds more importance than it ever has?
Great question. In this century, I will be the first Democrat to hold the position. Kathy Cox was the last person, first woman too. Kathy Cox was. It's very significant. But I think for me, rather than think about history, because I've been the first, I was the first African-American to serve as legal counsel to a governor. And so I've had those firsts before. What I think I'm leaning in more than anything is I received the endorsement of labor, AFL-CIO, and most labor unions in Georgia. I'm thinking about working people. My campaign, if I think about it, is a modern pro-people candidacy, where I'm thinking about regular, working, everyday people. I happen to have the experience to be able to do the job. I think sometimes people forget that this is a state agency with about 250 or so employees, with a $59 million budget that has to understand appropriations and how to deal with the General Assembly. It's not just getting on television or saying, oh, I'm going to fight for rights. It's bigger than that. You have to run an agency. And so I have the qualifications to be able to do that, but the legal background is what sets me apart. Unlike my opponent, I'm an actual lawyer. I don't play one on television. I am one. And I'm a judge. So that gives me the temperament to understand how important the right to vote. To me, it's the most sacred right that we have. And that's why I'm running. I'm going to do everything in my power. This is the city, but the state of Andrew Young and Dr. Martin Luther King and John Lewis. We have collectively, as Georgians, a responsibility to that legacy. And that is to make certain that all of this politics, look, I'm not a politician. I often say that. And so, but I'm a pro-people person, where my opponent is a pro-politics person.
Now, you mentioned your civil rights background, and you are running for the office that essentially de facto runs elections. We know the counties do, but of course the SOS is really where the buck stops. What do you think it says about the state of elections, especially in Georgia, that you are referring to your civil rights background for a role that has to do with elections?
Well, one of the things that I'm very concerned about, and I'll break it down for a lot of the viewers who may not really understand how this is done. I oversee elections, and there is a state elections board. We can probably talk about that a little later. But at its very basic, elections are run are by local state elections boards. These are our neighbors and our friends and our relatives and people we go to soccer matches with, or church or mosque. And it's a slap in the face to believe that these people are doing a good job. Look, I trust our neighbors and our communities. And we're not going to have people from Washington or the federal government telling us that our community, our relatives, our friends, our neighbors, more than anything, are not doing the best job that they can. And so I think it's a slap in the face to what's going on. Could there be improvements? I'm sure. When I get in there, I'm going to do a forensic review. Like you said, it's the first time a Democrat has come in there. I'm going to make certain, but I believe in making certain that people are confident in trusting the people that we have running our elections.
Tell me more about that forensic audit you'd like to do, because I know that's a big part of your platform.
It is.
What would it entail, and what would you be looking for?
Well, the first thing that I have to do is you have to go to the money. That's critical, because wherever you spend your money is where your priorities are. It's my understanding that the office, they've used excuses when we did not handle, I say we, I mean the Secretary of State's office, did not manage their professions and renewing licenses, that they were understaffed and undersourced. You know, leaders say that all the time. So the first thing we want to do is look for waste and abuse. These are taxpayer dollars. And so I know that in some worlds, you know, they're building ballrooms and doing all of that with taxpayer dollars, but not with Georgia taxpayer dollars. So I am going to be a good steward over that money. And the only way that you do that is to do a forensic audit, which means you will look at where every dollar is going, what every employee is doing, and are we doing it to the benefit of the people of Georgia? Because what I have to look at first is looking at how the dollars are spent to protect our elections. That's the first thing. But then we have to look at all of the other areas. I oversee fraud and in terms of people scamming people. And right now, I'll go out and you'll have a grandmother, 80 years old, that's been scammed out of $50,000, and there's nobody to help them right now. And when you ask the Secretary of State's office what's going on, they say we're undersourced and under-resourced. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to do, I worked with Pierre Howard in the legislature. So I had to work with the Appropriations Committee. I worked there when Sonny Perdue was a Democrat, and then he came into a Republican. So I know that the Democrats are trying to flip 10 seats in the House. But if they don't, you have to have someone who is a seasoned CEO who understands how to go to the General Assembly. I have to work with them, regardless to their party. That's a new thing in politics, right?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that people underestimate how much coordination there can be between the General Assembly and the Secretary of State. And of course, if you ask Secretary Raffensperger, I don't think he'd give you a glowing review of that relationship. And so whoever comes in next, whether it's yourself or whether it's Representative Fleming, is going to have some mending to do. And keep in mind that Secretary Raffensperger was a Republican,
yes,
with a Republican majority, and it still was not a very cozy relationship. I want you to expound a little bit on how you would kind of repair that as a Democrat, with a very, very high likelihood that you'll have a Republican majority in the General Assembly. How do you work with them if perhaps they're not willing to work with you? And maybe even more so than that, they could make it adversarial.
Well, I'm sure they might. I'm an arbitrator and a mediator, licensed to do that, and a judge. And there's something about that. Don't underestimate the power of me being a woman of faith, and a minister. That means I'm always looking for a place of reconciliation if I can. I have one agenda, and that is for the people of Georgia. I will call out anyone that I have to. Now, my objective is to always see where we can find common ground. Common ground is services. So I'll give you an example. There was a lot of politics that went on between the Secretary of State and the General Assembly and everything that had to do a lot with President Trump and all of what was going on. I don't bring that to the table. So I come in with fresh eyes, a whole new perspective without the baggage of politics, right? So I come in saying, I'm a fixer. Let's get it done. A person who took a struggling office for the federal government and turned it around. I did that because you have to have know-how and what to do, okay? So that's one of the things I'm going to do. And then I'm reaching out to everyone in Georgia now, regardless to whether or not they vote red, blue, independent or not at all. Because we can't survive in Georgia and in this country the way we're going. We just can't. We want something better for our children and our grandchildren. We want to be able to have them go to school and see things differently. Look, I wear this because I believe it's a part of what my motto is. And I believe that we are better than this. I believe in the American promise. And if our leaders don't take a stand and say, wait a minute, let's put politics aside. If the office is understaffed, in the Secretary of State's office, the Office of Professions was so poorly handled that Tim Fleming and others chaired a blue ribbon commission that went around the entire state to fix a problem. And it was a dog and pony show. That his record shows that nothing was done. That's not the approach I would have taken. My approach would have been, let's go in here and see how we can fix it. Let's talk to the employees who are doing the work, right? Because they're employees. Then let's have listening sessions to the professions and the people who are our stakeholders to find out there was a better way to do it. But when you politicize everything and you're only trying to line it up so that you can run for office, I'm running for Secretary of State because I want to solve the problems that Georgians are faced with. We can start by making certain that someone answers the telephone. Something as basic as that. That's what I'm here to do.
Yeah. You know, your opponent, Representative Fleming, recently called you out at a Trump rally. He got up on stage and said, the SOS office is not a place for on-the-job training. He clearly thinks that you lack the experience necessary to step into this role. He served as Deputy Secretary of State for just about 8 years. You know, what would you say to him?
Laughable.
Yeah.
Laughable. I am a person. There is nobody more experienced than me. If anything, he's the joke. Because every problem that they have now, he can't run away from his record. I was the governor's lawyer. Yes, he worked for Kemp, but I was the governor's lawyer, did it. And as Governor Roy Barnes would say, who's chair of my campaign, and I never failed him once. A member of the judiciary, worked in the lieutenant governor's office for the Georgia Senate, ran a federal agency. What agency has he run? I'm saying I was assistant secretary for the Biden-Harris administration. So on the job training, I think maybe, because you know there's a lot of projecting that's being done. When you have nothing to say, you have to kind of make something up. I have such an impeccable record of integrity. On the job training, I'll put my record up against his any day. And I feel very comfortable with it.
Yeah. What about the safety of the job? Because again, if you talk to Secretary Raffensperger, he has been through a lot over the last couple of years, even from members of his own party. There have been threats, there have been lawsuits. This has become an extremely politicized position. Yeah. Is that something you think about? Is that something you're willing to take on?
Well, you know what I'm concerned more about than myself are those election workers. The federal government tried to get the names and addresses of these election workers. And thanks be to God, a judge said, no, we're not doing that. It's an arbitrary fishing expedition. They're not owed that. These people are most of the time retirees, volunteers, just trying to do their civic duty. I'm concerned for their safety. We've seen what happened to some workers in Fulton County. Do I think about what I'm doing? Absolutely, I do. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Safety is of concern, but I'm more concerned for those workers who are on the front lines every day trying to make certain that people have access to the ballot.
You know, the other thing we're going through right now, too, that will be inherited by the Secretary of State when they come in is this issue over how we're tabulating our votes going forward. You know, it won't be the QR system. We know that that is going to be phased out. We'll have a new system no matter what.
Yeah.
What is your ideal vision for this new way to tabulate votes in Georgia?
Yeah, I think that the machines, I'm waiting to see what the legislature comes up with. I can tell you like this, if I started telling you one of my priorities is to go to the budget and see what costs are, I'm going to let you know that when you do hand ballots, they're not as accurate and they're more expensive than using machines. So what we want to do is be able to provide access to the ballot, that every legal eligible vote is counted, but we want to do it in an accurate way. And so for me, whatever is least costly, but making certain that everyone can feel the confidence in the system is what I'm a proponent of.
Yeah, it may not be a system that you like. We may very well, for an example, go back to hand-marked paper ballots. You know, and we had that recent audit that showed that there was a much higher rate of error when it comes to hand-marked ballots than the QR code tabulations. If the legislature decides that hand-marked paper ballots or some other system that you maybe are not a fan of is what they want to do you support that effort or do you put up a fight against it?
Well, one of the things is I have to follow the law, right? I'm going to do that. But we have to put a lot in place to make this happen. What are some of the things we have to do? In rural Georgia, all of the election offices are not resourced the same. They just don't have it. So if they want to do this, then what we need to do is make certain that we give them the resources that they need to have the proper staffing. Number two, we need training. Everyone needs to be trained across the board so it is consistent. One of the things that I have a problem with early voting, some counties will start on the weekend while others start on Monday. Anything that confuses the voters, we should be doing everything in our power to make it convenient for the voters. But I am concerned about it not being consistent and not having the proper training and not being resourced. What I think when I talk to people throughout rural Georgia, they're concerned and they'll tell me everything doesn't revolve around Atlanta. And I'll say, well, tell me some of the issues. And they say, it's just not fair. We don't get the same funding as the big counties do. So if I'm fighting about anything, I'm going to be fighting to make certain that we can bring to 159 counties as much equity as we can so that they're getting the resources that they need.
Yeah, you know, when it comes to our technology, I know that President Donald Trump certainly has his questions. We heard him give a primetime address earlier this month talking about his concerns about the security, about the validity, and about really the overall safety of the methods of voting in states across the country. I know you were very critical of his address. What was he saying in there that concerned you as someone who could very well be in charge of the Secretary of State's office in a few months?
Honestly, I think it was a pretext to divert the people of the United States from what's going on, whether it's a war. Bring the evidence. Remember, I'm a judge and an attorney. Put the evidence up. 63 courts back in 2020. They went to 63 courts that could not find evidence. So bolstering behind a camera and saying something doesn't make it so. 6 years ago, the people of Georgia, you know what they want? Forward thinking. Right now, kids are getting ready for school. There are parents having to figure out how to buy school supplies and how to get school clothes, health care. All of this is a diversion because they're not winning and they understand that. People are actually hurting. And so I believe that it was really a waste of time. I was very, very disappointed. We were all sitting there thinking there was some big revelation of things. And even from his own party, it's almost as though it's that same old tired record that just keeps playing over and over again. But until you produce evidence, you're a news person. Don't you want evidence? Regular, everyday people. What amazes me is that, and that's why I love the jury system. We let juries, regular, everyday people, decide whether something is guilty or not guilty or liable or not, because regular, everyday people have common sense. And I believe that the citizens of America and in Georgia are asking, just show us the evidence. You can really some credible evidence, not bolstering and trying to change our attention from a war or failing polling numbers. But you know something? I'm not running against him. That's why I don't do a lot of talking about him. I'm running against Tim Fleming now. I don't even do a lot of talking about him. I'm talking about the future for Georgia, because that's really what people care about. And unfortunately, people are struggling right now. They're struggling with gas prices. They're struggling with health care, but putting food on the table. And I think that I bring something different, a breath of fresh air. But for whatever happens, you have to really be careful about what they do with women. And I'm very concerned about that statement about being ready on the day one. If there was ever a person, to be very honest with you, I'm overqualified for the job.
Yeah. Let me ask you about President Trump one more time.
Okay.
6 years ago, Secretary Raffensperger stood up to the president in that now infamous phone call where he was asking for votes in Georgia. If you were to get a phone call like that, would you also stand up to the president?
That's no question. January 1st, 2021, we all remember that call. Just get me 11,780 votes. You know what's concerning me? So absolutely, to answer your question, because I hate politicians who dodge questions. I answer questions. I wouldn't have even gotten the call. He would know that he's dealing with a judge. He's dealing with a civil rights lawyer. Never would have gotten the call. You know what's concerning me? That Tim Fleming flew to the White House to plan out how he was going to run for Secretary of State. He won't have to get the call because maybe have they already planned how they're going to do it. How do you get 11,000 votes in a system where you're counting it and you're recounting it and you're auditing it? How do you do that? It was alarming to me. Is this how they've been doing things? So I was very, very concerned. But to Secretary Raffensperger's credit, he did the right thing. And I will always do the right thing.
One other thing, too, on elections, and then I want to talk about some of the administrative roles that you can play in people's lives. This past special session, Republicans rejected an opportunity to draw new maps that probably would have had a huge impact on the midterm elections. I think a lot of people were surprised. A lot of people were pleased by that decision. When do you think redistricting should be done in Georgia? And if you are Secretary of State and the legislature wants to try to do it before that mandated date of 2030, how will you handle that?
I think overall, we should have nonpartisan commissions to do this. When the Supreme Court did in its last ruling in the case in Louisiana, that indicated they put a standard that was so high, and I don't want to go into legal jargon with everyone, but you basically have to prove racism, that it was done with that intent. And otherwise, you can do whatever you want to do. So in many cases, the Supreme Court has become a part of all of this. And it's very disappointing to me, who's given my life to the law. Redistricting, I believe, they decided not to do that. Everything that's being done now is a them against us mentality. It didn't make great political sense. They saw, I was down at the Capitol that day. I heard when they said they weren't going to do it. It was galvanizing an energy like no other. And they read, probably correctly, that this is something we need to let go. So I'm going to do as the nominee, because we still don't know what they're going to do, right? I'm going to keep speaking out against it when I'm Secretary of State. If I'm telling you I'm running a pro-people campaign, that means that I care about the people of Georgia and what's best for them, not what's best for me, not what's best for me as a Democrat, because once I become Secretary of State, I'm there to represent everyone, not my base, not stoke fears about my base, because what's happening now, I believe, is the politics of fear and the politics of scarcity. And scarcity means you're saying, if these people get this opportunity, then that means that takes something away from you. That's what redistricting is. It's basically saying that everyone's voice can't be heard, and we can't win on the policy. You know, we don't have enough good policies to win on that. We're going to win on cultural issues that continue to divide people. So I'm going to stand up to that, like I've been doing pretty much all of my life.
Yeah, be real with me, though. You know as well as I do, I don't think a Republican majority in the General Assembly would go for an independent redistricting commission. Do you think they would?
A woman can dream. You asked me what I want to do, remember?
How do you get it done, though?
How do we get it done?
Yeah, because there are states, Michigan for one. I know there are others, certainly they tend to be more of a thing in blue states.
Yeah.
But in Georgia, you may not have the support you need to get an independent commission.
Well, let's wait and see what happens in November. We've got a strong ticket all the way from the top. Senator John Ossoff is not playing. And I think that there will be a blue wave. That's what all of this is about. They're afraid of it. Now, I still have to work as hard as ever. So I'm not sitting back on my laurels and thinking that. But let's just see what happens in Georgia. Georgia has been blue before, has it not?
You worked for Governor Barnes.
I surely did. And I think people forget about that. You know, this is a snapshot in time. Pendulum always swings. And I think we have a good chance. And when that pendulum swings, we'll have the opportunity to make certain that things that we can do to remove barriers and give access to as many people as we can, we need to act on that. And we need to do it when we or have the votes to do that. So you just never know. I know you're laughing at me because you're a student of politics, but you never know, you know?
I don't make any predictions, so no, I certainly do not, never know. I wanted to also ask you about some of the things that people may not be as familiar with that the Secretary of State's office does, and that's really the red tape, administrative, licensing element of this job. Certainly people know that secretaries of states shepherd elections in Georgia, but there is a lot of things that the Secretary of State's office does that touches people's lives. And I'd like to start with licensing. There is certainly, we hear it all the time. There are a lot of complaints in Georgia that anyone from nurses to truck drivers to barbers have to wait much longer than they feel they should for professional or business licensing. And we hear them say there's too much red tape in the process. So if you get elected, what gets cut?
Well, let me say this so we can make certain that we clear the record, because as a judge, I always want the record to be clear. This is the distinction between me and my opponent. He was over that, and that's why it's failed miserably. So what I'm going to do is make certain that we have to triage immediately. I have to go in and see what's the backlog, what's going on. There's a computer system called Goals. I'm not going to get into all of that. That's just not working properly. They just can't get it working. Tim Fleming went around the whole state with this Blue Ribbon Commission coming up with something and nothing happened. So what I plan on doing immediately is triage. And I did that when I did that with the office that I took over, which was dysfunctional for 20 years and came in and cleared out a backlog. And so what we want to do is deal with those issues that are a backlog first, see what the red tape is. Government is notoriously known for red tape. Let's see what we can do. Technology is our friend, but let's use that. So I actually plan on going out throughout the state and setting up locations where people can actually come in and see someone about their backlog. Not have to call up, not have to go to Macon, not have to come to Atlanta, but we will dispatch it in Columbus and we'll go to Augusta and we'll go to, I'm actually going to deal with that. We're going to deal with that in the first 90 days.
You're talking about opening new field offices.
Absolutely, even if they're temporary, so we can deal with people being able to come in. Sometimes you just want to come in, let's bring in your license. I've got to go to Augusta. When you think about the medical individuals there, all the nurses at the Medical College of Georgia and all of those areas, every time a person cannot get a license, that's an economic issue in our state. We always talk about Georgia being the best place to do business, but it is the best place to work. And that's what's not happening. This office has been more than anything a gatekeeper and not a partner with businesses and with those who have licenses. And now more than ever, when you're talking about affordability, every time that nurse or that barber or that contractor or that chiropractor or that dentist can't get their license in a timely manner, that goes to bottom line, kitchen table, their pocketbook issues. And that's one of the main things that I'm planning on solving. And you really can solve it without having to ride around town, making a public statement and a commission where all you do is talk. It's time for action. And that's what I plan on doing.
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to the relationship with the General Assembly, because you're right. They had this Blue Ribbon Study Committee on licensing. Maybe when we come back into session, we'll see some of the fruits of those labors. However, this is something that when it comes to licensing, you may have to make friends with the General Assembly to get some things passed. Is it something that you feel they care about? Is it something that you feel the Republican majority in the General Assembly cares about, getting people through this process of licensing faster than they are right now?
A predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And I believe that they don't care. That's part of the problem between the difference in my vision and my opponent's vision. It's really who really cares about people. And so how do I plan on doing it? I'm going to do it very smartly. Try to build relationships and do it quickly. But there are 700,000 people in Georgia who hold these licenses in 40 professions. And we will talk with them. And they will come with me to speak with the General Assembly. And we will, just like we did when it was redistricting, we will speak loudly and clearly to make them understand that this is important. There was never a leader to galvanize that because they were a part of the problem. But when I'm an advocate, when you kept saying about civil rights, one of the things about civil rights is we know how to galvanize people. And I plan on bringing in those professions. And I'm going to say, look, they are here to serve you and they're not serving us. But I am, first of all, want to be not in an adversarial position, but I really want to build relationships, but they have to be willing to build them with me.
I wanted to just finish on two more elections questions with you. The first is over maybe what might be one of the biggest anvils around the neck of whoever wins this office, and that is the Fulton County FBI raid. That is an ongoing investigation, which we know almost nothing about. How do you handle that? How do you go back and forth between these agencies like Homeland Security, the FBI, the White House, to really advocate for Fulton County in this investigation, because they have certainly been trying to advocate for themselves to not much avail, but they have not had someone maybe at the Secretary of State's office that's been on their side for that. How do you come in and try to handle that investigation to the best of your powers?
Well, two things. I'd like to make a point, and then I'll tell you how I'll deal with it. I know that there has not been a mumbling word from the Secretary of State. Can you imagine the person who's over elections has not weighed in on this or anything? One thing I also know that my opponent has not said not one word, because when you get your orders from someone else and not the people and what is right, then you remain silent. So one thing we know, if another person, if my opponent is elected, there will be nothing that will be said, because nothing has been said. Past behavior is indicative of what will happen in the future. What will I do now? I will follow the law and really be there to speak out against what's happening. The courts have said that this is a fishing expedition. We know that. I know that this has been political theater. What bothers me more than anything, and you can tell from the interview that I'm concerned with government resources and how they're spent. I'm a Democrat, but I talk like they used to talk. And that means we care about people's tax dollars and how they're spent. 260 FBI agents. I was a former assistant attorney general, worrying about something that's not even happening. So I'm very concerned about that. At this point, I would say put up or shut up. Show us the evidence. Otherwise, let's let these people, let's let our community, let's let our neighbors and the fine folks down in Fulton County do their job. If something comes up, my job as Secretary of State will do everything that I can to improve the process. But what I want to be able to do, we have 159 counties, not just Fulton County. And if they do it to Fulton County, that means they might feel like they can do it anywhere. And I believe it is my job to make certain, not to defend a process, but to stand for what is right and use the law for this. We have to make certain that we say at every turn, this is not normal. We can normalize this behavior, but this is political theater to sow doubt. People are saying, why are people sitting on the sidelines and not voting? We have 2 million registered Black people who don't vote. You know what you do when you don't believe that your vote even matters? When there's confusion, when there's doubt, that's why people don't vote. And that's what this is about, because they know that their strategy and the policies that they have is not a winning strategy. And so I think it's a lot of political theater, and it's much ado about nothing.
Yeah. Now, we've even heard Chairman Pitts say that there's no such thing as a perfect election. I don't think I think you'd be delusional if you thought that any election went 100% right up to snuff. However, I wanted to ask you if there was anything in Georgia's electoral systems or processes, and you said it earlier, that there are some things that maybe could use improving. Being clear-eyed about it, what can the Secretary of State do to improve Georgia's voting systems, voting processes for the people casting ballots? What needs improvement?
Well, until I get in the office, honestly, I won't know. And I think a lot of times people who are running for office, they want to politicize something. I'm not here to criticize anyone. What I am is to do the job. Number one, what could be improved is the fact that we need consistency over the 159 counties. I know that. Number two, they're not resourced at the same level. And so I know we can improve on that. Number three, there's not enough transparency about what's going on in that office. We need a report card. We need to invite the press in and say, look, let's not be afraid about that. Make us better. Let's be accountable. That's what I plan on doing. And the only way we can do that is have listening sessions. I'm not going to go from the top down. It's going to be a bottom-up approach. And so I will learn what's going on. The reason why I can say I'm sure there are improvements, because I have been the governor's lawyer for state government. I've worked in the judiciary and in the federal government, and no system is perfect. And so what I want to do, when you're not politicizing it, is saying, what can we do to make certain that it's effective, efficient, and the best use of taxpayer dollars in order to get the job done? Whatever happened to leaders saying, what about taxpayer dollars? We're just spending money as though it's our money to spend. And I'm very, very concerned about that. And I think that they're not mutually exclusive. I think that we can make certain that we have security for our elections, because that's very important. That we can have technology to use, that we can make it certain that it's convenient for people to vote, and that it is following the law.
Yeah. Well, Judge Reynolds, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Awesome.